Hi, this is Mediha Khan from Toronto Condo Investments. Joining me today is Cory Bluhm, Executive Director of Economic Development at the City of Kitchener. Thanks for joining me, Cory.
My pleasure.
Great. Cory, we've heard so much about the City of Kitchener over the past several years. Kitchener-Waterloo region, home of the BlackBerry, University of Waterloo, and now tech giants like Google have come in and chosen Kitchener to set up their offices. Wanted to chat more about the City of Kitchener. We work closely with many investors and we bring them opportunities to invest in cities that are up and coming and growing and promising from a future perspective. So let's start off, Cory, by talking about that tech industry in Kitchener. Can you walk us through the growth of where it is today, current state, and what do you anticipate for the future?
Yeah, so interestingly, you know, some may not know this, but before the pandemic hit, Kitchener was the fastest growing city in Canada, well eclipsing even Toronto and Vancouver and some of the typical large growing cities. And it wasn't by accident. It's been, for us, a 20 plus year journey. So maybe to give some context, we've always been historically a manufacturing town, a very aggressive manufacturing town. It's typically made up the majority of our employment, and very quick to adapt from traditional manufacturing to more automated manufacturing and injecting innovation in manufacturing. That's kind of been Kitchener's bread and butter, and Waterloo, who we're basically joined at the hip with as a community, had always been front and center with the University of Waterloo around innovation and technology. And so as companies like BlackBerry began to grow, there was really kind of two different cities. There was Waterloo that was heavy on tech, really based on BlackBerry and others, and then Kitchener and manufacturing. And so two interesting things happened in the 2000s. So first, we were actually faced with a manufacturing crisis. So what happened, if you can remember, that very short time when the Canadian dollar actually got past the American dollar? Great for consumers, bad for industry, because typically we've been seen for American companies, particularly out of Detroit, Cleveland, as a very affordable supply chain provider. So they would provide contracts up to our companies who would then provide parts into the US. So that was really one of the strong bases for our economy. So as when the Canadian dollar rose, we became less financially viable, and they would start retracting jobs. And I can remember, in the early 2000s, it seemed like every month there was a company laying off 100, 200, 300 jobs. And really, a major point of crisis for us. At the same time, our downtown was really struggling. It was, one of the classic, there are many across Ontario in the, late 90s, Brantford, ourselves, others who were just, the people had left the core and weren't investing in the core. And we, as a community and as a city, said, you know what, we're tired of waiting for the private sector to fix this problem. We're going to aggressively try to solve the problem ourselves. So we created a $110 million investment fund, which is very rare for municipalities. Even big cities have rarely ever generated that kind of capital to invest in their cities. But we did it because we were at a state of desperation and need and crisis. So we began to advance it. But interesting, at the same time we were beginning this process, BlackBerry was starting to reach its decline. And some might think, like, when you hear of a major company, one of the biggest companies in a town, they didn't necessarily close, but they certainly retracted. That usually means pitfalls for the community, and you certainly see that in the auto sector, and then the communities just get decimated. But interestingly, what happened for us was those that were getting laid off or let go from BlackBerry, these are people with degrees, people who have been in innovation space before, who know what it's like to now build and be part of a tech company, and they started to emerge in the workforce. So we, as a community, decided to invest in a few industries, really to evolve ourselves, not to turn our back on manufacturing, but to really become a more diverse, robust community. So we started to invest, tech being one of the key areas we invested. So we supported an organization called Communitech, who are one of the now global leaders in tech and startup growth. And they really built an incubation program which soon after that, the University of Waterloo with a program called Velocity came in. So these two programs, which sit in the same building in downtown Kitchener, became an engine for really twofold. For one, those that had sort of lost their jobs in the tech industry and didn't want to just go and find another tech company job, but actually wanted to start their own company, were able to go to these two programs and start to build their companies. And then the University of Waterloo very insightfully decided, you know what, why can't university students, while they're here, actually start companies and get credit for starting those companies? And ideally, once they graduate, they will then have a company that they will launch and grow. So, these two streams really started to fuel a complete transformation of our community, certainly in Kitchener. And because they were housed right in downtown Kitchener, very quickly over the last 10 to 15 years, we've become really the center of the Canadian tech startup ecosystem, simply because there's so many companies that had graduated from these programs and began to not just grow, but scale significantly, which ultimately led companies out of Silicon Valley to take notice. So Google, which was originally acquired, a small startup in Waterloo, eventually saw that the amount of talent and tech startups coming out of this ecosystem was comparable to what they had experienced in California, and started to grow their operations here. So now they're one of our largest employees. Their goal is to expand to in excess of 1,000 employees, and really take a strong foothold as they already have in our community. So you put all of those factors together, all of those elements together, and what's emerged is this really interesting, robust tech community that we'll talk a little bit in the future where the path goes, but now it's about how do we grow from tech and how that integrates into industries. But just as kind of context setting, that's we sort of sit back and even think, wow, like what an amazing transformation for a community in such a short period of time.
And it's incredible that the city was able to do this themselves, like diversify, recognize the problem, and like you said, not wait for the private sector. Because we see this at the provincial level with Alberta, what they're trying to do, diversify beyond oil and gas. And for a city the size of Kitchener to be able to do this and successfully and attract top corporate giants, it's quite incredible.
Yeah, and I think one of what we think separates us from most other communities and why we've been successful is, and it's one of those things when they say, what's in the water in your region. One of the things that's in our waters is this spirit of collaboration. So, in many communities, if a city was to do what we do, they try to do it all themselves. They, build a new arena, build new highways, build industrial land. We didn't actually take that approach. We took a partnership approach. We said, okay, we've got 110 million. How do we turn that into 220 million, or ideally, ultimately, turn into about 700 million by going and finding other partners who would bring money to the table to match our funding to launch bigger initiatives. And there's if some aren't familiar, we're both historically have a German and a Mennonite culture. Germans being very industrious, very innovative and wanting to build things, and the Mennonite culture is very much around collaboration. So they call it the barn raising effect, which is if someone's barn burns down, the entire community comes back together, and as a community they build the barn back. And that's really, you take those two cultures and you fuse them together, and that's really, I think, the identity of our community, which is, let's be ambitious and let's build, but let's build it all together, and let's not simply let government, for example, do all the heavy lifting, or private sector. Let's actually bring the two together.
Yeah, that's great. Now, you mentioned innovation. You mentioned players like Velocity and community tech. I know Velocity is associated, were birthed out of University of Waterloo, which is one of the top-ranking universities in Canada and globally, and attracts some really smart talent, smart students, and gives out graduates with extreme talent. Can we talk about the importance of University of Waterloo and the upcoming Innovation Center to foster this growth in tech?
Sure. Yeah, and it's actually for us, so as a community, just to put it in perspective, we're presently about 625,000 to 650,000 people as a region. And then you add on top of that, we have well in excess of 70,000 students that study in our community. And while 70,000 may not be big in a Toronto number, when you think relative to, like, that's a city into it itself within what's, our scale of city. So they are a significant proportion of our community, and it's driven by, so University of Waterloo obviously is one of the premier research and innovation universities in not just Canada but in the world. We have Wilfrid Laurier University, one of the top business schools in Canada, and then we have Conestoga College, which is consistently one of the top colleges in Canada, and really leading the charge. Initially on the integration of business and academics, and really trying to train, actively training people with companies, for companies, and has really emerged into what they call the polytechnical space, which is then how you even evolve that even further. So we've got these three powerhouse universities and colleges, and as I said, collectively 72,000 people that they have a tremendous, and that's just their students, it's not even their faculty and their staff. And so just as a community, you can see how that they shape so much of the way we view and think as a community. I've had a chance to visit other communities that don't have the same, even close to the same kind of presence. And I actually find there's a complete difference in the way people think in our community versus others. Like here, when you're going through high school, it's never even considered to be an alternative, but it's almost like you must go to college and university, and you must strive to go to Conestoga if colleges are out because they're the premier school, or business, you go to Laurier and UW if you're into innovation. It's just, and those, I don't think that's bred in every other in other communities. It's just the way we've come to be. So I think that just as a community, it's forced us as a community to be innovative and to really to push forward that I don't see in other places. So I think what's really then set us apart, because there are other communities that can boast those things, but University of Waterloo, for example, three things that really set them apart. One is the co-op program, which they launched. So it's very much we're going to bring the brightest minds to our campus, but then we're going to give them work terms, and we're going to have them really prepared for work when they graduate. And for some could have 6 terms of work terms before they actually graduate. And can you imagine the head start that gives them with being competitive in the community? So again, all to say why companies from all over the globe look to us to acquire talent. It's because our universities are so progressive in building a pipeline of really amazing students. The second thing, they have an IP policy that if you discover an innovation as a faculty or a student, you get to own that and you get to keep it. Most other universities don't. So that's really helped to fuel our startup economy, because if you're a professor, for example, and you discover a new drug or a new technology, you get to commercialize it yourself. They actually have an organization called the Accelerator Center that you can go to, and they will actually help you turn that innovation and that patent into a scaling company. And then thirdly is velocity, which we'll probably talk about more, but just that very simple thought of them, it doesn't have to be just faculty. Why can't it be a student that discovers something and then it can turn that actually into a company? So you stitch all those three together, and I think you can sense that's really the backbone of our growth. Really, everything from us as a community grows from the inside out. Whereas other communities, it's trying to attract big companies to bring big jobs. Ours, companies come to us because they want the talent base, and then they're going to grow within. So I think it's just a really unique and dynamic ecosystem that we know very well, but I think there's quite a few that don't actually understand what's in the water here and what makes us tick.
That's a really great point. I think I don't think people truly understand the depth of what's happening there. Like, you hear about it, but how you describe it, like, you're not only identifying the talent or the idea, you're nurturing it and then allowing them to commercialize it themselves, which is huge, right? From an entrepreneurial spirit perspective.
Yeah, and I think it's also, as a community, allow us to evolve from, like, I think a lot of cities, the universities are kind of on their islands all to themselves, and don't really have an impact beyond the few blocks that kind of surround it. And this infusion of co-op and startups has really allowed the two universities and colleges really to their influence to be infused throughout our community, because they graduate people that start companies that come downtown Kitchener and then start to reshape the landscape in our downtown. So yeah, it's really, again, you kind of got to be in it to really see it and feel it. But once you're here, it becomes pretty clear and obvious, what our sort of secret to success is.
Can you talk about the upcoming Innovation Center and what that's all about?
Sure. Yeah. So interestingly, so as I mentioned before, so we 20 years ago, our city council said we're going to invest $110 million. I mean, at the time we were in a point of crisis, and we've seen, because of that, we've now seen one of the most dramatic transformations of any community, any downtown in all of Canada. Just to give you a frame of reference, so it started with tech, which then led started with education and technology, which eventually led to this boom of companies and jobs. And now what we're seeing is the boom of residential. So we've seen, well over $2 billion worth of construction, predominantly in high-rise residential in the last 5 years. At one point, we had 14 cranes in the sky for 14 mega developments, which again, on a Toronto scale, may not seem impressive, but we've never seen a mid-sized city grow at that scale and that size. And to evolve into, I mean, most of the proposals we're getting now are 40-story condo towers, right? Like we're very quickly evolving into a big city. So interestingly, about 2.5 years ago, we knew we'd passed that point of challenge, and we were seeing the fruits of 20 years of hard work. It would have been very easy for us as a community to say, "Yep, job's done. We can sit back, and now the private sector, you can just kind of take over and let the city evolve as you will." But that's not how we think, and that's not what our community wanted to do. They said, if we can do it once, why don't we do it again? And why don't we challenge ourselves to build an even better community? So we spent well over a year engaging with our community, our business leaders, our stakeholders, our company leaders, and challenge them to say, if we could become the city that you want us to be, what would that be? And what was super inspiring is they didn't say we want to be the wealthiest and the most profitable and the biggest. They said, we actually want to be the community that does the most good in the world. We want to not just grow for the sake of growing, we want to actually grow for the sake of making our planet better, which I can appreciate sounds like, wholly audacious and, how are you ever going to do it? But I think it underlined our values as a community and where we want to go. So that led us to say, okay, we've created now a second $110 million investment fund that we will use to invest over the next 10 years in similar partnerships like we did previously, but this time the community wants us to focus on some very specific actions. So first and foremost is health innovation. Interestingly, even before the pandemic, we could see that there was going to be a significant need for innovation in the healthcare system, for the very simple reason that the cost structure of public health dollars is heavily weighted to those who are 70 plus. So as we age, we become more expensive to the healthcare system, and exponentially more expensive as we get closer to the end of our lives. And with the baby boom generation making such a sizable component of our population, as they age up, it's actually has the impact that I think by about 2041, we project it would actually double the cost of healthcare in our community and we're talking like billions of dollars across the whole province. And, there's no way I think the tax base could ever support a doubling of our healthcare costs, which tells us prime opportunity for innovation. So what we've done is we've partnered with the University of Waterloo and the Velocity program to build what we're calling an innovation arena. So it's a 90,000 square foot facility, half of which will be entirely geared to startup companies in health and medical technology. The other half will likely be focused on research and integration of other industries and making sure that it truly is ground zero for health innovation in our community. What I think is, again, interesting in our approach, most health innovation you would think would come out of places with med schools like U of T or McMaster. We actually think not having a full-scale med school here is actually our benefit. That we'll have innovators looking at it from a different angle than you would normally find at a med school, and that it will come not just from practitioners but innovators outside of the healthcare system saying, "Hey, I think I got a solution." And then so our challenge is how do we bring those two worlds together so that we can support a new kind of innovation in the health space. It's funny when we made our first $110 million investments, the two biggest investments we made, one was Communitech, which I've described, The other was an investment in the University of Waterloo School of Pharmacy and McMaster School of Medicine, and they're literally on the other opposite side of a road. So Victoria Street's here, one's here, one's here. We said someday these are going to fuse. We hope, and now this innovation arena, which is nestled right between these two, is actually going to be the place that these two worlds finally collide and allow us to kind of emerge as hopefully, leaders in not just tech but health technology and innovation. So.
Well, that sounds so promising. If you create a space, like, they will come, right? So this is incredible that you've got something so amazing.
Yeah, and one of the interesting, we hadn't thought of this when we made the initial investment, is kind of pointed out after, but one of the impacts of the pandemic is, office companies, not just tech, but all office companies now can reimagine the way they work, and they may not necessarily be in physical office space, which, if there isn't a community around worried about how are you going to, refill office space and what do you do with office space, I don't know. I'd love to know that community. But what was pointed out to us is, health innovation is very difficult to do virtually, especially anything based on the lab. You need physical space, you need people together. And so, we're optimistic that as this ecosystem grows, it'll only, bolster our office space and an ecosystem here. So, kind of, and we'd love to take credit and say we had that foresight. We didn't, but we can kind of look in hindsight and say, this is a wise place to be investing.
Yeah. Oh, and it sounds very diverse when you mention it's just not tech in one space. You've got manufacturing, you've got health innovation tech, and all sorts of diversification, which is important, right, for a booming city, and not to rely on one source or one industry.
Exactly, and within our $110 million investment portfolio, two of the other areas that our community want us to invest in is, one is creative industry. So so that's film, music, animation, video production, you name it. Again, we're not a strong community in that front. In fact, in animation or gaming, we tend to have companies that only focus on the back end of it. So the technology base, we've never really been strong on the artistic side or the creative side of game production. But we know we need to. We know it's a growing industry, and if we don't start to make investments, we'll fall behind other communities. So again, we haven't announced any investments there yet, but you can imagine the next couple of years there'll be some sizable investments that we'll be looking to make in that industry. And just recently, last week, our city council endorsed moving ahead with what we're calling a Sustainable Development Goals Lab and an incubation space, which is to take the same recipe that's worked in tech and apply it to the fields of social innovation, sustainable development, environmental innovation, and start to foster companies in that field. So it truly is diversification of, like, we've got a recipe that can work across any industry, and now let's leverage that to see even wider spread growth across our ecosystem.
Nice. Now, you mentioned residences and housing, and a lot more condos going up. You mentioned 14 cranes in Kitchener. That's sizable in a city like Kitchener. What does that mean in terms of population growth as well? Like, we've talked about over 70,000 in the university over there. We know top employers are there, so you're attracting talent as well. And according to Statistics Canada, I think the Tri-Cities in the Waterloo region grew over 50,000 since 2016. And it's projected to be one of the fastest growing cities in the province. So what does population growth look like for the city of Kitchener?
And actually, I think the latest projections are, so we're at about 625,000 as of 2020. They project we'll be at about 925,000 by 2051. So we'll hit the million mark at some point. But what's interesting that people may not understand is we were one of the leaders in environmental preservation. So we call it a countryside line. I think the GTA calls it the green belt, same concept, but at a regional level, we basically drew a line around Kitchener, Waterloo, and Cambridge and all of our smaller towns and said, the city's not growing past these, it's going to have to grow up. So one of the key investments the region has made in the past few years was $1 billion investment in what's called ION, which is our light rail transit system, which runs from the top of Waterloo right down through the universities, through the middle of Waterloo and Kitchener and to the south end of Kitchener, and will ultimately eventually feed all the way down into the south end of Cambridge. So we'll have this singular spine, not unlike the Yonge Street subway line, although an LRT line, and done very consciously. And I mean, I'm sure anybody who's been in the CN Tower knows what happens along the Yonge Street line. You eventually see all this significant growth, and we're already seeing that translate here. And so it's driven by a few factors. So first and foremost, because you can't get, it's very challenging to buy new and build new suburban type style housing. There's more demand within the center of our city. We also have we're always one of the youngest communities in Canada because of our university presence. So our buyers are typically, we got probably an abnormal number of buyers to other cities our size in the 25 to 35-year-old age group. And we've always had that, and we always will have that as long as the universities remain present. But one of the factors that's really driving us today is our baby boom echo. So the kids of the boomers. So the boomers represent, like this big, like 40% of any community, and I think their kids make up 25 to 30%. So significant buying power and consumer group. That group for us is pushing into that condo and rental phase of their lives. And so for us, it's about to peak, and it's supposed to remain high until about 2026, after which it'll start to dissipate. And that's simply the tail end of the boomer echo, kind of pushing now up into more traditionally more single detached or semi-detached housing. So you combine all those factors, and that's really what's driving this incredible boom and demand for smaller condo units right now. Pre-pandemic and pre the real estate shift. So we like every other community, Toronto included, our prices have just skyrocketed at an astronomical and nonsensible way, if I can say that. The average single detached house now in Kitchener is well over $1 million, which that's just an astronomical jump. So you put all those together, and we initially would have said there'll be a big boom. It will taper a bit, and then it will be, I'm thinking predominantly in kind of condo rental units. There might have been a bit of a lag, and then it would have been restocked with empty nesters. So the baby boomers now, selling their single detached house and moving into an urban setting. But I think that landscape has potentially changed, and that formula may be very different, given the challenges of affording a new house. And, will we see, in our case, someone in their mid 30s who normally exits the condo market and gets into single detached ownership, do they stay on longer? Is there a different supply of housing stock that gets built in the future years to accommodate that? I don't know, but I have to imagine, it's all at the end of the day, money and pressure. And if you can only afford what you can afford, and the single detached house is now out of your sadly out of a possibility, you're certainly going to look elsewhere.
And that's what we're finding in Toronto as well. Like, it's just become so unaffordable for that single detached home that condos have become by default, and for some people by choice, the choice of housing dwelling to live in. And it's also creating, the market dynamics is creating more renters for life or longer. And some people are simply not choosing to move out of their homes, right? So a lot of different dynamics at play here, but in all of it, the condo or condos in general have been now the preference of people to move to live in for longer, and in the downtown cores. From, I think, preferences and lifestyle changes over the years of wanting to live, work, and play close to everything, and the idea of a walkable city location that's close to transit and amenities is more preferred by people choosing quality of life versus spending time commuting. And I think we've had a sense of, or a taste of that over the past couple of years as well, right?
And it's funny to think, like, at the end of the day, a household can only spend what a household can spend, and it's going to have to make choices. And you wonder if the people were starting to make the choice of, why have two cars? If I can get rid of one car, I can use that funding for either put it into my equity in my property, or just enjoy life more. And I think I can imagine more people are going to be forced with those decisions of, hey, if I own a condo, as opposed to, if I own a single detached dwelling, my lifestyle may not be what I want, because now every excessive dollar I've got is going to be poured into that housing. And if I can find a more affordable, or maybe I choose to rent, do I get to live a different lifestyle? So, I mean, I'll be intrigued to see how both, Toronto and our region respond to that. And, do people make different decisions than historically we've made? I imagine, you're no different than me. We're always bred to, get a house, build equity. That's the kind of the path to success. And now that path to success for some means, an unenjoyable lifestyle. And are they going to, buck a traditional trend and go a different direction? I think some will by choice, and some may just have no choice but to take that option.
Right. And you mentioned having a very big young population between 25 and 35. And typically, those are your starter years to rent. And towards the end is when you start looking into home ownership. So the younger folks want to be in the downtown cores and closer to work. And if your only option there is the condos, newer buildings with greater amenities. So I think that sounds like tremendous good opportunity to get into that market where you've got not only students, top talent, students, top universities producing great talent, and jobs, employment there with top, employers who are well-paying jobs, right?
Yeah, and then you add to that, I think we're the other area we've been fortunate is, pre 2010, we were predominantly the place where a young person they'll get their degree here. They may go to Toronto or Silicon Valley until they hit, family age, and they find a partner, and then they move back, because you could get so much more house and so much more lot here for the price that you could, in San Francisco or New York or Toronto. But because of that demand, historically, we've built up one of the most extensive networks of pools, arenas, community centers, and just public infrastructure that typically has served that family age. So it'll be interesting to see, if people age in place, so to speak, and raise families in condos, do they get the best of both worlds? They can have the vibrant urban lifestyle, but they're in a community that is surrounded by really family centric amenities. And is that an opportunity one day that's going to help continue to keep demand high for our housing stock?
Oh, it absolutely will. I think, we see that happening in the greater Toronto region. Like Toronto downtown is kind of playing catch up and realizing, hey, there's families living here. So let's build that community center. Let's bring in those daycares. Whereas the outskirts, city like Vaughan, that's building a brand new downtown, one of the first things they did was extend that TDC line up to Vaughan. So that exists prior to all the development and the residentials taking place or completing. And they've got the bus terminal. They also have a YMCA, which is going to be the flagship, and a library. So it's, I think the younger cities have the benefit of learning from bigger cities like Toronto. They're learning their experiences and doing it in a more meaningful and thoughtful way of, from getting the amenities and the facilities there prior to bringing in the residences. So if you've got that already, that's attractive to families.
Exactly. And I think that's, the light rail transit line, our mass transit, we probably, when we started, didn't have the growth. It was interesting. It's rare for community to say, we're going to build it for the future, not for the now. And that's a very hard thing to do politically, but it was very much our motivation of LRT is not necessarily just for today's commuters. It's about reshifting people's lifestyle and the way we see ourselves over the next, growing as a community in the next 20 to 30 years. And so, I'm excited to see families living in an urban area able to take an LRT to an arena or a community center or a pool, and seeing that kind of lifestyle play out here.
Yeah, and on transit, can we touch on the two-way GO
Yes.
that we're hoping to have between Kitchener and Toronto? That would be a game changer for people from a work and living perspective. You've got more choice now.
Yeah, and two interesting factors. One is, so we typically find within our community, we have a large number of couples and families where one partner works in Kitchener and Waterloo, and the other partner will have a job typically in, say Mississauga, Milton, maybe into Toronto, but typically it's the sort of the northern and and western part of the GTA, and one of them is constantly commuting back, and probably not the greatest lifestyle for the one that has to do the drive. But we also know that many of our companies, because we're seen as a center of innovation in our province, you'll have big companies in Toronto that will have innovation outposts in Waterloo region, or vice versa. Major tech companies here that will have a finance, marketing, and business wing in Toronto, and constant flow back and forth. So anyone who's driven along the 401 pre-pandemic knows how horrific of an experience that was. And just not a conducive way to move people. So we have for well over a decade been advocating to the province, and they've been responding and trying to build a two-way all-day go system. So we're not simply, like many communities, just commuting people into Toronto, but we have just as much need for the commute backwards, and to bring people from the GTA into Kitchener and Waterloo to fill many of our jobs. People may not know, like on any given day, usually there'll be about 1,000 job openings in our region for high qualified positions. So requiring master's degrees, engineering degrees, et cetera. We simply, even with all of our students, can't keep up with the pace of growth here. And for us to continue to thrive, we need that sort of two-way connectivity with Toronto. So you may have heard of, we call it the Toronto Waterloo Innovation Corridor. It's really, a partnership between our community and the Toronto community to say, it's a different relationship between Waterloo region and Toronto than Toronto may have with other cities, where it's they're bedroom communities. We're not a bedroom community, and we've never thought of ourselves that way or thought of that. We're really a symbiotic city with the GTA, and I think the GO train would just further facilitate that productivity, which from is just purely good for economy of a province, that everything isn't solely hinged on Toronto producing all of the economic growth, but that you've got these two communities that are really symbiotically supporting growth within each other's areas. So.
And when is that supposed to be completed or anticipated completion?
Yeah, so they continue to scale up lines coming back. There's some significant infrastructure changes that the province needs to do, because the line right now is only a singular line, and they have to dual the track, and and you can imagine, as long as 100 kilometers of rail line and all the roads and bridges that have to go in. So we're up to, the good news is the province is committed to it, and they continue to make investments as they can. And our hope is that within, I forget the current promise, but I think the goal is to have 4 or 5 runs coming back this way throughout the day within the next 5 to 10 years. Don't quote me on that because it changes regularly, but
hey, we're still waiting for the Eglinton LRT to complete, so we're very well aware of timelines in transit.
Exactly. But no, I think it just shows. Again, I think maybe people aren't quite as aware. If they don't know what's going on in our ecosystem, they don't understand that it's a different relationship between us and the GTA as opposed to some other communities of a similar proximity. That we're. And I think that's one of the bonuses of, I think, and again, I'm biased, but, we're not a bedroom community. We very much are our own kind of vibrant, bold city. And that's urbanizing really fast, and will very soon be our own big city. And I think what you get, investing or living in Kitchener, is that you're part of this innovative ecosystem. And I think that's what's exciting for people. And I think people have been really drawn from the GTA in particular about being part of this journey and this story. Like, we're not there yet. We're probably midway through this evolution of, going from a mid-sized city to a more vibrant big city, but you get to be a part of that change in that landscape, which is exciting to many, I know.
Oh, exciting, and lots of opportunity there, right?
Exactly.
Great. Well, lastly, Cory, as a local resident of Kitchener, tell us more about living in Kitchener and raising your family in Kitchener.
Yeah, so I've lived here my whole life, other than a few short times in Northern Ontario and Toronto. It was funny. I remember I had a job in the summer in Toronto, and I was probably 21, and remember thinking, geez, Kitchener seems kind of sleepy. This would have been probably 20 years ago. Thinking Kitchener seems kind of sleepy, and maybe I will eventually take a job in Toronto. And then I took a job in, fairly remote northern Ontario, and then realized, okay, actually, you know what? It's all perspective. Like Kitchener actually is uh,
Booming.
booming. You know, nothing bad to say about northern Ontario. It's a fun experience, but it just reminded me that it's relative to what you're used to. So so I think and we actually had somebody who was interesting who had actually moved from Paris, took a job with a tech company. She was probably in her late 20s, so in the prime sort of socializing and nightlife years. And she said to me once, she said she thought she missed Paris until she realized like her life in Paris revolved around 6 blocks, and she could actually find the same 6 blocks here. Just we in our minds we think we need all of these other big amenities that we never actually use, right? Like I'm sure people in Toronto, brag about the Scotiabank Arena or the Sky Dome or whatever, and all these things. Do they actually use them, or do they just like to say that they're close to it, right? So
Yeah.
so I think I certainly have come to realize that I can travel to Toronto for those things. I don't need it in my community. I just need those things. So I think what's interesting for living here is, certainly if you're in family age, all the amenities you need are certainly here. If you're university age, 70,000 people, uptown Waterloo, and Waterloo really provides an amazing experience. Where we're evolving is that kind of middle point. So between sort of 25 and 35 is where we're evolving. That's really where downtown Kitchener is really positioning itself to be the space for that community. It will take time as every cycle happens. The vibrant restaurants and retails, we've got a number, but the boom in that happens after the residential comes in. It's a very telegraph formula that works in every community. It goes jobs and housing, then you get the commercial vibrancy. So I'm really excited to see that take off in the next few years, especially as we get out of the pandemic and see new entrepreneurs who see all of the housing that's going up downtown. So just in downtown alone, I think there's about 5,000 units that will be coming online over the next 2 years. So you can imagine that's like 7,500 new people in a very small area. It's going to change. You're going to see new entrepreneurial ventures. So that's certainly exciting. So I think we're really hopeful that we won't just be that university and family lifestyle. We'll actually one day, and I think we're getting there already. We can offer the lifestyle across the whole age continuum, and be vibrant for you no matter what age category you fall into.
Well, absolutely. And that's how certain pockets in Toronto have grown. You bring in the residences first, the buildings come in first with retail at the bottom, which attracts more people, right? And businesses and retail, all that good stuff. So there's no reason to believe that it's not going to get there. And like you said, it's close enough to Toronto where you can be on the highway for another, quick drive to the Scotiabank Arena, watch a game or a concert, and be back home, right?
Yeah.
So.
And I think and interestingly, like, so we are still 3 different cities and a bunch of different towns that in our rural area. And there's an interesting dynamic because of that, which is, and I've heard this from people who have lived in big cities in GTA, that sometimes you can just feel like you're one of it's kind of like a faceless community, and you're one of all these people, and you don't really know anybody, and it's a very anonymous lifestyle. Whereas here, and maybe we grow to that, but still today we're small enough that you can know everybody you pass on the street and have that very personal feeling within your community and that connectedness. We haven't got that big yet. So I'm curious as to what point a community gets so big that you start to lose that, but I'm excited that we still very much have that. And I know that's for certain buyers, that's what they're looking for. They're looking for community and new friendships and social opportunities. And fingers crossed, when we emerge from this pandemic, we hope that'll still very much be an opportunity here.
For sure. Well, thank you so much for your time, Cory. This was incredible. We learned so much about Kitchener. Thank you.
Pleasure's all mine. Thank you for having me. And looking forward to any of your clients interested in Kitchener to not be shy, and always happy to help people understand the uniqueness of our community. So thank you.
So thank you.